The pounding on the clubhouse door came at 2:47 in the morning, desperate and relentless, the kind of sound that spoke of terror rather than trouble. Marcus "Tank" Williams was on watch that night, a mountain of a man who had seen combat in 2 wars and violence in countless streets. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought. When he opened the door, he found 2 small boys standing in the rain. Identical twins, maybe 8 years old, with matching black eyes and split lips that were still bleeding. They wore thin pajamas, soaked through to the skin, and their bare feet were cut from running on gravel. The first boy spoke in a voice that shook with fear and determination. The words he said would echo through the Iron Brotherhood for years to come. They were simple, direct, and devastating. He said that a man had hurt their mother and that she needed help right now. Tank did not hesitate. He pulled both children inside, wrapped them in the leather jacket off his own back, and called for the president. Within minutes, the clubhouse that had been sleeping came alive with activity. The Iron Brotherhood was not a charity organization. They were outlaws, men who lived by their own code in a world that had rejected them long ago. They had done things that would make civilized society recoil. But they had one rule that superseded all others, one line that could never be crossed. No one hurt women, no one hurt children, ever. The twins huddled together on the worn leather couch, watching with wide eyes as hardened men gathered around them. These boys had run through the night seeking help from strangers they had been taught to fear. They had found something else entirely. The president of the Iron Brotherhood was a man named Samuel Cross, though everyone called him Ghost. He had earned the name for his ability to move unseen, to appear and disappear like smoke in the wind. At 53 years old, he had led the club for 2 decades, with a combination of intelligence and ruthlessness that kept them alive in a world designed to destroy them. Ghost knelt before the twins and studied their injuries with eyes that had seen too much. The bruises were fresh, the cuts still oozing. Someone had beaten these children recently, within hours. And from the way they flinched at sudden movements, this was not the first time. He asked them their names, keeping his voice soft, non-threatening. The first twin said his name was Michael. The second said his name was Matthew. They were 8 years old, and their mother was named Sarah. Ghost asked where Sarah was now. The answer made every man in the room go still. Michael explained that she was at home, with him, the man who had hurt her. He said that the man was a police officer, that he had a gun and a badge, and that he had told their mother he would kill them all if she ever tried to leave. The room erupted in murmured curses and clenched fists. Ghost held up a hand for silence, his face betraying nothing of the fury building inside him. He asked how they had found this place, how they knew to come here. Matthew answered this time. He said their mother had told them. She had said that if anything ever happened, they should run to the bikers on Miller Road. She had said they were the only ones who might help. Ghost stood slowly, his decision already made. Sarah Mitchell had known about the Iron Brotherhood for years. Everyone in the small town of Riverside knew about them, the way people know about forces of nature they cannot control. They were feared, avoided, whispered about in grocery store aisles and church parking lots. Decent people stayed away. But Sarah had learned that decent people were not always good people, and the monsters who hurt her wore the uniforms of those society trusted most. She had married Derek Mitchell 12 years ago, when she was 22, and believed in the kind of love that movies promised. He was a police officer, respected in the community, charming in public. Behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. The abuse started slowly, the way it always does. A shove during an argument. A slap that he immediately apologized for. Controlling behavior disguised as protection. By the time Sarah understood what was happening, she was trapped in a web of fear and isolation that seemed impossible to escape. She had tried to leave twice. The first time, Derek found her at her sister's house and convinced everyone that Sarah was mentally unstable. The second time, she went to the police station to file a report. The officers looked at her bruises, then at Derek's badge, and sent her home with advice to work on her marriage. The system that was supposed to protect her was the same system that employed her abuser. Sarah began to lose hope. She began to believe that this was her life until death ended it, probably at Derek's hands. But then she noticed the biker clubhouse on her route to work, and she began to listen to the stories. Stories about men who protected women when no one else would. The Iron Brotherhood mobilized within the hour. Ghost divided his men into 3 groups with military precision. The first group would go to Sarah's house. The second would establish surveillance on Derek Mitchell. The third would stay at the clubhouse to protect the twins. Tank volunteered to lead the rescue team. He had a daughter of his own, estranged now but never forgotten, and the thought of a mother trapped with her abuser ignited something primal in his chest. He selected 4 of the club's most experienced members, men who knew how to move quietly and act decisively. They rode through the pre-dawn darkness, their motorcycles' engines muffled to avoid attention. Sarah's neighborhood was a collection of modest houses on a quiet street, the kind of place where people believed bad things only happened elsewhere. Derek's patrol car sat in the driveway, a visible reminder of why Sarah had never been able to escape. Tank positioned his men around the property, 1 at the back door, 2 covering the windows, 1 in the truck they had brought for extraction. Then he walked up to the front door and knocked, loud enough to wake the dead. Derek Mitchell answered in his uniform pants and undershirt, his face still bearing the flush of alcohol. He was a big man, 6'2" and solid, with the build of someone who had played football in high school and never stopped believing he was invincible. He demanded to know what Tank wanted at this hour. Tank's response was simple. He said he was there for Sarah and that she was leaving tonight. Derek laughed, the confident laugh of a man who had never faced consequences. That laugh would be the last sound he made as a free man. What happened next would later become legend in the Iron Brotherhood, a story told to prospects and visiting members from other chapters. The night the club went to war with a badge and won. Derek reached for the gun on his hip, but Tank was faster. 40 years of violence had given him reflexes that Derek's training could not match. The gun clattered to the floor, and Derek found himself pinned against his own doorframe with a forearm across his throat. Tank spoke quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. He explained that there were 2 ways this could go. Derek could let Sarah leave peacefully, or Derek could find out what happened to men who hurt women and children. Derek chose the third option. He spat in Tank's face and screamed for help. The neighborhood lights began to turn on. Doors cracked open as curious neighbors peered out. This was a small town where everyone knew everyone, and the sight of bikers confronting a police officer would spread like wildfire. Tank did not care. He had stopped caring about consequences the moment he saw those twin boys with their matching bruises. Sarah appeared in the hallway behind Derek, her face a map of old and new injuries. She was thin, fragile, with the hunted look of someone who had lived in fear for too long. But when she saw Tank, when she understood what was happening, something changed in her eyes. Hope. After years of darkness, hope. She walked past her husband without a word, stepped over the threshold of her prison, and climbed into the waiting truck. The other bikers had already gathered her essentials, things she would need for a new life. Behind her, Derek screamed threats that no one believed anymore. The reunion at the clubhouse was something none of the hardened bikers would ever forget. Michael and Matthew ran to their mother the moment she walked through the door, wrapping their small arms around her as if afraid she might disappear. Sarah collapsed to her knees and held them, sobbing with a relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. Ghost watched from across the room, his weathered face betraying nothing. But the other members saw his hands, clenched into fists at his sides, trembling with an emotion he would never acknowledge aloud. The club's old ladies, the wives and girlfriends, who had their own reasons for choosing this life, immediately took charge of Sarah's care. They cleaned her wounds, found her clean clothes, prepared a room where she and the boys could sleep. There was a protocol for this, developed over years of taking in women who had nowhere else to go. But Sarah's situation was different, more dangerous. Derek Mitchell was not just an abuser. He was a cop with connections and a badge that would protect him from most consequences. By morning, he would have the entire department looking for his wife and children. Ghost called an emergency meeting of the inner circle. 8 men gathered around the scarred wooden table that had witnessed decades of decisions, and they faced the reality of what they had done. They had declared war on the police. Not just one corrupt officer, but an entire system that would close ranks to protect its own. Every member of the Iron Brotherhood was now at risk. Their families, their businesses, their freedom. The vote was unanimous. They would protect Sarah and her sons no matter the cost. Some fights were worth everything. Derek Mitchell moved fast. By noon the next day, he had filed a missing persons report claiming his wife had been kidnapped by a biker gang along with his children. He painted himself as the victim, the grieving husband and father desperate to find his family. The local news ran with the story. And suddenly the Iron Brotherhood was being portrayed as dangerous criminals who had abducted a police officer's family. Ghost had expected this. He had prepared for it. Years ago, the club had established relationships with certain lawyers, journalists, and politicians who understood that the world was not as simple as good guys and bad guys. These contacts were called in now, tasked with a counter-narrative that would expose Derek Mitchell for what he really was. The evidence was not hard to find. Sarah had documented years of abuse in a journal hidden in the false bottom of a jewelry box, pages filled with dates, descriptions, and photographs of injuries. She had tried to report the abuse 3 times, and each report had mysteriously disappeared from the system. But there was more. The Iron Brotherhood had resources that legitimate investigators did not. Within days, they had uncovered 4 other women who had filed complaints against Derek Mitchell, complaints that had been buried by a department that protected its own. 2 of those women agreed to speak publicly. The other 2 were too afraid, their silence a testament to how thoroughly Derek had terrorized them. The story began to shift. Local news became national news. A corrupt cop exposed by the very outlaw society feared. The irony was not lost on anyone, but Derek was not finished. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Derek Mitchell was very much cornered. The attack came on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after Sarah's rescue. A group of off-duty officers, loyal to Derek and angry at the exposure, decided to send a message. They arrived at the clubhouse in unmarked vehicles, armed with weapons that were definitely not department issue. What they found was not the easy target they expected. Ghost had anticipated retaliation. The compound had been fortified, guards posted around the clock, security cameras installed at every angle. When the vehicles approached, the club was already mobilizing. The confrontation was brief but violent. Warning shots were fired on both sides. 2 bikers were wounded, 1 seriously. 3 officers retreated with injuries they would have difficulty explaining to their superiors. The rest fled when they realized they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. News of the attack spread quickly, captured on security footage that was immediately uploaded to every platform the club could access. The narrative shifted again. Now the story was not just about a corrupt cop, but about a conspiracy of officers willing to use violence to silence victims. The FBI got involved. Internal Affairs launched an investigation that could no longer be buried. Derek Mitchell found himself suspended, then arrested, then facing charges that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Sarah watched the news coverage from the safety of the clubhouse, her sons asleep on either side of her. She had spent years believing that no one would help, that the system was too powerful to fight, but she had been wrong. Sometimes it took outlaws to bring justice. Sometimes the people society feared were the only ones brave enough to do what was right. She looked at Ghost across the room and nodded once, a silent thank you that spoke volumes. The trial of Derek Mitchell became a national spectacle. Prosecutors presented evidence of systematic abuse spanning more than a decade, corroborated by medical records, witness testimony, and Derek's own text messages threatening Sarah and the boys. The defense tried to paint the Iron Brotherhood as the real villains, but the jury was not convinced. Ghost testified under subpoena, his presence in the courtroom causing a stir among spectators. He wore his cuts proudly, the patches declaring his allegiance to a world most people would never understand. The prosecutor asked him why the club had intervened. Ghost's answer was simple and devastating. He explained that they had a code. Women and children were protected always, no matter who threatened them. He said that when the law failed, when the system protected abusers instead of victims, someone had to step up. He said that the Iron Brotherhood was many things, some of them illegal, but they were not cowards who looked away while innocents suffered. The courtroom fell silent. The defense had no cross-examination questions. Derek Mitchell was convicted on 12 counts, including assault, false imprisonment, and witness intimidation. The judge, a woman who had seen too many cases like this dismissed by frightened victims and corrupt systems, sentenced him to 25 years without possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, Sarah broke down in tears. Her sons, now staying with relatives during the proceedings, would grow up without fear for the first time in their lives. Ghost watched from the back of the courtroom, then slipped out before the cameras could capture him. The club did not seek recognition. They had done what needed to be done, nothing more. But Sarah would never forget, and neither would her sons. The months following the trial brought changes none of them had anticipated. Sarah, freed from the prison of her marriage, began to rebuild her life with a determination that impressed even the most cynical members of the club. She found work at a local shelter for domestic violence survivors, using her experience to help others trapped in similar situations. The shelter had connections to the Iron Brotherhood, a quiet partnership that had saved countless lives over the years. Sarah became a bridge between two worlds that rarely spoke to each other. Michael and Matthew thrived in ways their mother had only dreamed of. The trauma would leave scars, therapists warned, but children were resilient. With proper support, they could heal. The twins found that support in unexpected places, including the clubhouse where they had first sought refuge. Tank became something like an uncle to them. He taught them to fish, to work on engines, to stand up for themselves without using violence. He showed them that strength was not about hurting others, but about protecting those who could not protect themselves. Ghost maintained his distance, watching from the periphery as he always did. But Sarah noticed small kindnesses that no one else saw. College funds established anonymously, bills paid without explanation. A guardian angel in leather and denim who asked nothing in return. The club's reputation shifted subtly in the community. They were still outlaws, still feared, still operating in the shadows of legitimate society. But now, there were whispers of something else. Stories of women rescued, children protected, justice delivered when the system failed. The Iron Brotherhood was not changing who they were. They were simply revealing who they had always been, beneath the leather and the violence and the code that bound them. 5 years passed. Derek Mitchell died in prison, killed in an altercation with another inmate whose sister had been a victim of domestic violence. The news reached Sarah on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a detective who still felt guilty about how the department had failed her. She felt nothing. The man who had terrorized her family was gone, but his death brought no satisfaction, no closure. Closure had come years earlier, the night her sons ran through the rain and found help at the door of strangers who became family. Michael and Matthew were 13 now, tall and confident, with none of the fear that had marked their childhood. They still visited the clubhouse regularly, helping with maintenance, listening to stories, learning lessons that no school could teach. Tank watched them grow with a pride he would never express openly. These boys who had arrived terrified and bleeding had become young men of character. They understood loyalty, honor, and the difference between following rules and doing what was right. Sarah had remarried a quiet man who worked as a carpenter and treated her sons like his own. He knew about her past, about the club, about everything. He accepted it all without judgment, understanding that survival sometimes required alliances that polite society would condemn. Ghost attended the wedding, standing in the back row in a suit that looked uncomfortable on his weathered frame. He stayed only for the ceremony, disappearing before the reception, but Sarah saw him there. She saw the rare smile on his face as she walked down the aisle. Some debts could never be repaid, but they could be honored, remembered, passed on to the next generation as proof that humanity existed in the most unexpected places. The Iron Brotherhood continued, as it always had, as it always would. Members came and went, some to prison, some to early graves, some to the quiet retirement that few outlaws ever achieved. But the core remained, the code unchanged, the mission unwavering. Ghost stepped down as president at 63, passing the gavel to a younger man who had proven his loyalty through years of service. He did not disappear entirely, remaining as an advisor, a voice of experience when difficult decisions needed to be made. Tank became the club's primary liaison with the network of shelters and safe houses they had quietly built over the years. His military background made him effective. His personal investment made him tireless. He had found purpose in protecting others, a redemption for sins he would never discuss. The night that Michael and Matthew had arrived at their door became founding mythology, a story told to every prospect, every new member, every ally who needed to understand what the club stood for, not just the violence and the illegal activities that sustained them, but the code beneath it all. Protect the innocent, punish the guilty, stand for those who cannot stand for themselves. Sarah came to the clubhouse every year on the anniversary of her rescue. She brought food, shared stories, thanked men who insisted no thanks were necessary. Her presence was a reminder of why they existed, why the risks they took mattered. The world would never understand them. Society would always fear what it could not categorize. But the Iron Brotherhood did not need understanding or acceptance. They needed only each other, the code, and the knowledge that somewhere out there women and children were safer because they existed. That was enough. It had always been enough. 20 years after that rainy night, Michael Torres stood at the gates of the Iron Brotherhood compound, his twin brother Matthew beside him. They were grown men now, 28 years old, with careers and families of their own, but they had not forgotten where they came from or who had saved them. Tank had died the previous winter, a heart attack that took him quickly, mercifully. The club had given him a proper send-off, hundreds of bikers riding in formation through streets that fell silent in respect. Michael and Matthew had ridden at the front, honorary members in everything but official status. Ghost was still alive, ancient now, his legendary stealth reduced to a careful shuffle supported by a cane. But his mind remained sharp, his eyes still seeing everything, his presence still commanding respect without a word spoken. Sarah stood between her sons, grey-haired and peaceful, surrounded by grandchildren who would never know the terror she had survived. She had told them the story, carefully edited for young ears, but they could not truly understand. They could not imagine a world where their grandmother had been trapped, beaten, nearly destroyed. That was the victory, Michael realized. Not the trial, not the conviction, not even Derek's death. The victory was these children who grew up safe, who took protection for granted, who believed the world was basically good. Ghost approached slowly, nodding to each of them in turn. He said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The bond between them transcended words, forged in desperation and maintained through decades of gratitude. Michael looked at the clubhouse, at the men who had become his extended family, at the world that had saved him when he was just a frightened boy with a split lip and a prayer. Some doors, once opened, remained open forever.